My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the family that erased me from my mother's life until she made sure they could never touch what mattered most. It was raining the day of the funeral, a slow, heavy kind of rain that soaked into the bones. I stood in the back row of the small-town church, water still dripping from my coat, my hands clenched tightly around a wrinkled tissue. The pews were filled with her side of the family, all tight-lipped and black-clad, whispering behind their programs, throwing sharp glances toward me like I didn't belong there. Maybe to them, I didn't. Maybe I never had. Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister, spotted me first. Her lips thinned into a line as she turned from the front row and hissed under her breath, "Family sits up front." I took a step forward, eyes still red from the drive, from the grief, from the years of everything. "I am family," I said, my voice cracked but clear. From her left, my cousin Heather gave a short laugh, leaned to the woman next to her, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Not really." My chest burned. The back row suddenly felt like exile. I stood there, humiliated, holding back the tears that had already claimed enough of me. Just beyond them, only a few feet away, was the casket. My mother's casket. The same woman who used to braid my hair while humming Motown, who whispered bedtime stories even after I was too old for them, who once promised me, in the last real conversation we had, "If anything ever happens to me, you'll know I didn't forget you." I clung to those words like a life raft. The priest started the eulogy. He spoke of a woman full of grace, loyalty, tradition. The words felt foreign, distant, like they belonged to someone else. No one mentioned the daughter she raised alone for years before marrying into a family that never wanted me. No one said my name. They didn't look at me. I was invisible. Again. But I stayed. I didn't run. I watched every single one of their carefully controlled faces, because I knew something they didn't. I was treated like a mistake, like I didn't belong. But when the liar called my name first, I swear, their faces cracked like glass. I was born when my mother, Sandra Bennett, was just 19 years old, single, scared, and completely alone. Everyone around her told her to give me up. Her parents, her older sister Denise, even her closest friends at the time. They said having me would ruin her future, that no man would ever want her after, that I'd be a lifelong burden. But she didn't listen. She looked at me and chose to stay, chose to fight. And for a long time, it was just the two of us. She worked nights as a nurse, then slowly rose through the ranks to become a hospital administrator. I remember her coming home with tired eyes but still heating up leftovers and asking about my day like it was the only thing that mattered. But while she built a life for us, the Bennett family never softened. Her parents, strict, religious, painfully proud, treated me like a blemish they couldn't scrub out. And Denise, she made sure I always knew I wasn't one of them. I wasn't invited to sleepovers with my cousins. I wasn't in the holiday family photos. I remember one Christmas when every grandchild got a monogrammed stocking hung on the fireplace. Except me. Mine sat in the corner, store-bought and empty. But I had my mother. And when I was 13, she got a new job in a new city, and we left. Just packed up and started over. Those next few years were the happiest of my life. It was the first time I saw her smile without it costing her something. We'd eat takeout in bed, binge crime shows, and dream about the life we were building together. When I got into art school, she cried like I'd won an Olympic medal. She helped me move into my tiny dorm room, framed my first sketch, even paid part of my tuition with her savings. She was my biggest fan, my soft place to land. But around the time I turned 22, something shifted. She seemed tired again, smaller. She said it was stress, hormones, just the usual. And I believed her because I needed to. Then, 2 years later, she called me and said she was moving back home. Just like that. No warning. She said she missed her family, that it made sense to be near them again, that I should focus on building my future. I didn't understand it. It felt like she was pulling away, like she was hiding something. But when I offered to come, visit or help with the move, she brushed it off. That was the last time I saw her in person. After that, the texts became shorter. The phone calls turned into voicemails. I'd call, and Denise would answer, always cold, always impatient. Your mother's resting. She's not feeling well. She's fine. Eventually, they stopped taking my calls altogether. I tried writing letters. I never got a reply. I told myself she was just busy, that she was adjusting, that maybe I'd done something wrong. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how bad it was until I read her obituary in a newspaper forwarded to me by an old neighbor. A single paragraph that didn't mention me at all. No calls, no messages, no final goodbye. I remember sitting on my apartment floor, holding that newspaper clipping in my hand, numb. Sandra Bennett, beloved mother, sister, aunt, survived by her sister Denise and her nieces and nephews. That was it. Like I had never existed, like I had been erased. But even through the shock, something in me sparked. I knew my mother. I knew she wouldn't have let them shut me out unless something deeper was at play. Unless she had a plan. And she did. The drive back to my hometown took 5 hours, though it felt like 5 lifetimes. I hadn't seen that place in nearly 6 years. Not since Mom left without warning and slowly slipped out of my reach. I stared at the road in front of me, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, still trying to process how I'd learned she died. Not from a call, not even a text, but a message from an old neighbor who found me online. I'm so sorry to hear about your mom, she wrote. She was a wonderful woman. I didn't even know what she was talking about until she sent the obituary. I walked into the funeral late, soaked from the drizzle, breath tight in my chest. The moment I entered the church, the stairs started, cold, measured, judging, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Aunt Denise sat in the front row, dressed in black, holding a silk handkerchief to her nose. She leaned toward her daughter and whispered something behind a painted-on frown, and they both looked at me with the kind of pity that's sharper than hate. I stood in the back, the outsider again, just like always at the reception held in the community hall down the street. It only got worse. I tried to find a quiet corner, somewhere to breathe, but the whispers found me first. She shouldn't have come. I heard someone mutter behind a tray of casseroles. She didn't even visit Mom once. The words hit like a slap. I wanted to scream that I tried, that I called, that I begged, but instead, I stood there, swallowing everything. Again, then Eric, my cousin, smug, always Denise's golden boy, cornered me by the drink table. You disappeared, he said, arms crossed. Don't act like you care now. Something cracked in me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Not grief, not defense, just this aching silence I'd been carrying for years. I was devastated, not just by losing her, but by the story they'd rewritten, by how they'd made my absence part of their version of the truth. Like I had chosen it, like I hadn't been forced out. That's when I saw the man in the suit. Polished, calm. He approached with a folded umbrella and a black leather briefcase. "Claire Bennett," he asked, extending a hand. "I'm from the law office handling your mother's estate. She requested your presence at the reading of her will." Aunt Denise was on him in seconds. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly, her voice all sweet poison. "The family will handle things from here." The man didn't flinch. "Actually," he said, and then turned to me with a slight nod. "Miss Bennett is the primary beneficiary." Time stopped. I saw it happen, Eric's mouth opening, then closing without a sound. Aunt Denise's face draining of color, her eyes darting around like she couldn't find solid ground. The room around us buzzed with confusion and tension, but I was perfectly still in that moment. I realized something. My mother never forgot me, and whatever came next, this wasn't over. The lawyer's office was sterile and quiet, tucked behind a row of oak trees that whispered in the breeze like they knew secrets. I sat across from Mr. Halpern, the man in the suit from the funeral, still numb, still disbelieving. He slid a thick folder across the table and said gently, "There's a lot to go through, but you need to know everything." And so he told me. My mother had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer nearly 5 years ago. She kept it quiet at first, always the caretaker, always protecting everyone else from the weight of her truth. But when the treatments became too much, she moved back to her hometown, not because she missed it, but because Denise convinced her she'd be taken care of, that she needed family around. But what she got wasn't care. It was control. They managed her medication, sat in on doctor's appointments, screened her calls. Mr. Halpern said Sandra tried to reach out several times, letters that never arrived, voicemails that were deleted, calls she wasn't strong enough to fight for. Denise and her family told her I had moved on, that I was busy with my new life, that I probably didn't care. And in her vulnerable state, I think part of her believed it, or feared it, but not enough to let go of me completely. Because then Mr. Halpern handed me something else, a sealed envelope, soft from wear, with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a simple note. Asterisk, don't let them rewrite who you were. To me. Asterisk, that's when I cried. Fully, gutturally. For the years stolen. For the phone calls I thought she ignored. For every birthday I spent wondering why she went silent. I had been grieving her long before she died. But now, a new feeling cracked open inside me. Not just sorrow, but rage. A white-hot fury curled into my chest, sharper than grief. They erased me at the funeral, spoke like I never existed. And now, they were about to watch everything they tried to steal come back to life. My mother left everything to me. The house she lived in, the life insurance, the entirety of her savings. But most unexpected of all was the art studio. I didn't even know it still existed. She'd once dreamed of painting full-time, had even rented a small studio back when we lived in the city. But I thought she gave it up when she got sick. Turns out, she kept it, kept painting, kept holding on to something beautiful even as her body broke down. I drove there the next day. The space was dusty but intact. Easels lined the wall. Jars of brushes and tubes of paint filled the shelves. And stacked in the back, in plastic bins carefully labeled with my name, every sketch, painting, and doodle I had ever sent her since I was a child. She hadn't let go of me at all. She'd been holding on, quietly, Fiercely, I started going there every day, scrubbing the floors, repainting the walls, restoring what was hers, and now mine. I read through her journals, her letters, some addressed to me, some just raw thoughts. In every page, she fought to remember herself as more than someone's patient, and me as more than someone she left behind. Meanwhile, the family turned. Denise called first, voice syrupy but thin. I think we should talk, sweetheart. This whole thing, it doesn't feel fair. When I didn't respond, the text started, then the threats. Be reasonable. We took care of her while you vanished. You don't deserve it. But I knew better now. I knew the truth. And more importantly, I had the proof. I hired a lawyer, set boundaries, and then I did something I hadn't planned on. I posted a tribute to my mother online, a photo of us from when I was a kid, covered in paint, both smiling with our hands stained in color. I wrote about who she really was, about the woman who raised me alone, who gave up everything and never let me feel it. And I told the truth about what happened. How she was isolated, how I was cut off, how grief can be twisted into narrative by the people who benefit from it. The post went semi-viral. Old classmates, neighbors, even strangers messaged me with support. But what hit hardest were the comments from former co-workers, nurses she worked with years ago. She talked about you constantly. She said you were her greatest pride. She missed you every day. They tried to erase me, but now I was writing us back into the story. The mediation was held in a quiet conference room lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a parking lot soaked in rain. Claire sat on one side of the long table, flanked by her lawyer, a calm woman with sharp eyes and even sharper documentation. Across from her sat the people who had tried to erase her existence. Aunt Denise, arms crossed like a barricade, Cousin Eric shifting in his seat, red-faced and scowling, and a smattering of other relatives whose names Claire barely remembered but whose judgment she'd never forgotten. The air was thick with smugness, entitlement, and something else, fear. They had expected her to break, to fold, to cry or walk out or hand over what they believed was theirs by blood and by right. Instead, Claire sat tall, composed, and silent, as her lawyer opened the folder in front of them and began laying out the evidence. First came the emails, digital trails from Sandra to Claire, months and years of messages laced with warmth, support, apologies for the distance. They don't want me to talk to you, one read, but I never stopped thinking about you. Then came the medical records. Doctors' notes showing how her family controlled her access, changed medications without her input, insisted on accompanying her to every appointment. And finally, the notarized letter, Sandra's handwritten statement, signed 6 months before her death, asserting that she was of sound mind and deliberately leaving her estate to Claire because her family had emotionally coerced, manipulated, and neglected her during the most vulnerable years of her life. Claire glanced at Denise as the letter was read aloud. The older woman's face paled but didn't flinch. Years of pretending had trained her well. But Claire wasn't done. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice steady. She hit play. The room filled with Sandra's voice, faint, raspy, but unmistakably hers. "If they try to come for you, baby, don't let them. You were always mine. They never saw you, but I always did." Silence. Even the mediator looked moved. It wasn't just evidence. It was a mother's final stand, a truth spoken into the void, now echoing back like thunder. The mediator, an older man with a stern but fair tone, cleared his throat and said, "Given the documentation, the medical history, and Mrs. Bennet's expressed wishes, there is no legal or ethical basis to contest this will. This matter is resolved in favor of Miss Claire Bennet." Denise's mouth opened, then closed again. Eric slammed his hand on the table, stood, then stormed out. The others followed, stunned into a kind of silent surrender, like the gravity of their loss had only just hit them. Not the money, not the house, but control, the narrative, the version of the story where Claire was nothing. Claire stayed seated, didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply exhaled. Years of being erased, silenced, excluded. They lifted off her shoulders in that single breath. Outside, the rain had let up. The sky was still gray, but lighter somehow. Denise waited by the car, arms still crossed, still clinging to her version of events. As Claire passed, she spat, "You poisoned her against us." Claire didn't even pause, just looked her dead in the eyes and said, with quiet precision, "No, you did that yourselves." Then walked away, not triumphant, not vindictive, just free. Claire moved into her mother's home not as a mourner, but as a builder. The rooms that once echoed with absence were slowly filled with intention. She didn't redecorate so much as resurrect, peeling back the years of silence and control her family had imposed, and restoring the spirit her mother had hidden in journals, brushstrokes, and whispered dreams. Within months, she transformed the space into a haven, an art residency for young women who, like her, came from families where love had conditions and voices were lost in the noise of shame. She named it the Bennet House, a reclamation, not of the family's name, but of the one woman who had made it worth remembering. Word spread. At first, it was local, a human interest story about a daughter honoring her mother's memory. But then Claire published her memoir, piecing together Sandra's letters, journal entries, and her own reflections into a raw, unflinching narrative about estrangement, grief, and the kind of abandonment that doesn't leave bruises but carves deep, invisible wounds. The book resonated far beyond the small town that once pushed her into the shadows. It went viral, shared, reposted, underlined, and quoted. A major media outlet picked up her story, and suddenly Claire found herself in front of cameras, telling the truth that so many had been told to keep quiet. Messages began pouring in, from daughters estranged from mothers cut off by their own parents, from sons, friends, spouses, people who had all felt invisible in families that preferred control to connection. Claire read every message. Some she answered, some she simply held close. Her voice, once muted by doubt and silence, now echoed with clarity and purpose. She hadn't just survived, she had lit a path for others to follow. When she finally returned to her mother's grave, it was with reverence, not sorrow. The cemetery was quiet, the sky a calm, muted blue. Claire knelt beside the headstone, weathered now but still dignified. In her hands, she carried one of her mother's early paintings, abstract and full of motion, like emotion with nowhere to go. She placed it gently against the stone, as if completing something unfinished. She whispered, "They tried to make me forget you, but you never let me." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Claire moved into her mother's home not as a mourner, but as a builder. The rooms that once echoed with absence were slowly filled with intention. She didn't redecorate so much as resurrect, peeling back the years of silence and control her family had imposed, and restoring the spirit her mother had hidden in journals, brushstrokes, and whispered dreams. Within months, She transformed the space into a haven, an art residency for young women who, like her, came from families where love had conditions and voices were lost in the noise of shame. She named it the Bennett House, a reclamation, not of the family's name, but of the one woman who had made it worth remembering. Word spread. At first, it was local, a human interest story about a daughter honoring her mother's memory. But then Claire published her memoir, piecing together Sandra's letters, journal entries, and her own reflections into a raw, unflinching narrative about estrangement, grief, and the kind of abandonment that doesn't leave bruises but carves deep, invisible wounds. The book resonated far beyond the small town that once pushed her into the shadows. It went viral, shared, reposted, underlined, and quoted. A major media outlet picked up her story, and suddenly Claire found herself in front of cameras, telling the truth that so many had been told to keep quiet. Messages began pouring in, from daughters estranged from mothers cut off by their own parents, from sons, friends, spouses, people who had all felt invisible in families that preferred control to connection. Claire read every message. Some she answered, some she simply held close. Her voice, once muted by doubt and silence, now echoed with clarity and purpose. She hadn't just survived. She had lit a path for others to follow. When she finally returned to her mother's grave, it was with reverence, not sorrow. The cemetery was quiet, the sky a calm, muted blue. Claire knelt beside the headstone, weathered now but still dignified. In her hands, she carried one of her mother's early paintings, abstract and full of motion, like emotion with nowhere to go. She placed it gently against the stone, as if completing something unfinished. She whispered, "They tried to make me forget you, but you never let me." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Claire sits in the renovated studio, barefoot, a warm mug in her hands as golden sunlight spills through the tall windows her mother once dreamed of replacing. The walls, once bare and cold, now pulse with color, paintings in progress, brushes drying, the soft scratch of pencil on canvas. Across the room, one of the girls from the residency is lost in her work, head tilted, brush moving with quiet intent. Claire watches her, a gentle smile forming, not from pride, but from a deep, settled peace. "They told me to sit in the back, like I didn't matter," she says in a calm, steady voice. "But my mother's final act was to put me first, not out of revenge, but out of love." She watches as the girl dips her brush in blue, leans in closer to her painting. Claire doesn't interrupt, just watches. And when love writes the final chapter, no lie can erase the truth. There's no need for grand speeches anymore. No need to prove anything to anyone. The studio is full of light, of presence, of proof. Final line. Soft but certain. They buried her, but she left the light with me.